book of Daniel was written by this figure, this prophet, Daniel, who lived in Babylon from Jerusalem, yes, by Nebuchadnezzar. Jerusalem was destroyed, and he had these adventures in Nebuchadnezzar's court, and then he had these visions, which he wrote down, prophetic predictions, sure, and he talks about the coming of the Greeks, and he talks about the Antiochian crisis, the mid-2nd century, and he talks about all these things in such great detail that, you know, ancient people, many of them, were as astonished by these as many modern evangelicals. Like, this is, oh my God, look at this. This is he's predicting things so precisely in the 2nd century. It's an amazing instance of fulfilled prophecy. Some keen-eyed observers have noticed that, well, wait a minute, there seems to be some inconsistency here right within the book of Daniel itself. What we see is when Daniel is speaking about things that take place during his own lifetime, historical details from his own time period wrong.
Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and today I'm joined by Dr. Kipp Davis, Dead Sea Scrolls scholar. How's it going, Dr. Kipp?
It's going well. And, so, by the way, I hope you like the new mic.
Sounds great, dude.
And the new camera. So these were donations.
Really?
From Josh Bowen and Megan Lewis. Some of the most
Digital Hammurabi. What a great channel, by the way.
Generous people I know.
That's awesome. Good people over there.
Very good. So yeah.
And it sounds amazing, and the camera looks good. So that's good to go. We're good to go, and we're rocking out. And we're gonna talk about. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say he told me that he was tired of listening to me sound like I was talking in a tin can. And he said he says, you know, I liked Minecraft, but like watching your videos was like an overload on watching Minecraft. So
that's hilarious. That's hilarious. What a good
friend. we have tried to remedy this. Yeah, absolutely.
What a great friend. All right. And by the way, I was just talking to somebody about you and Dr. Bowen and Dr. Jim Majors, and how it's good to have scholars as friends, because without you guys, I would go off the rails. I'm not joking. I'm a conspiracy theorist. Like, I love to be like, well, maybe aliens did it. Like, I'm always like, like I need scholars to keep me like in a straight path, and like
keep you all grounded.
Yes, you guys do this very well, and because it's so easy to go off into like wherever you want to go and whatever feels.
You know that conspiracy, like the I guess the mental framework for just being a conspiracy theorist, someone who's prone to these sorts of ideas. This is very religious.
That's why
I'm convinced of this. Yeah.
I mean, so I'm like the type of person who's like already set for that stuff. Like, I'm already like, what do you mean I can be saved eternally? I'm down for this. Let me join your cult. Like, that's just how I am. I'm built that way.
Exactly. And it's all like I'm fairly convinced when you look at like 20th century. Well, I guess we're in the 21st century now. Like 21st century conspiracy theories are all inherently religious and, most importantly, apocalyptic.
Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking just in terms of the like anything like it's pretty passé now, but for a while there was like an upsurge in flat earth ideas.
Yeah.
Which ultimately stemmed from a larger conspiracy about, you know, keeping the secret of what the world is really like quiet, and the reasons behind that all ultimately trace back to something that's more ultimately apocalyptic.
I can think
Similar with, I think you can see that kind of in the anti-vax stuff. You
right.
could absolutely see it in QAnon.
I was
Like,
just gonna say, I can think of 2 people right now who are flat earther anti-vaxxers, who I'm friends with, and they're both one of them is a Muslim, the other one's a Christian.
mm,
So they go hand in hand, which
very, very,
'cause they'll try to argue the reason why you're being taught the earth isn't flat is because it goes against the Bible or it goes against the Quran.
yeah.
And they want you to be it's Satan that wants you to learn that the earth is round. Like, those are the type of arguments you get.
Somehow the idea that the is a globe makes us less special and less significant.
Right.
Actually, this was part of I think when I watched Mark Sargent's very famous 10-part video series on the flat earth. That was like the first one, was, this idea that we're actually, you know, all living within this Truman Show set with the big dome over top, right?
Right.
And that this suggests to us that something out there made this place for us. It makes us special, right?
Yeah. What do
So
they call that in Genesis?
the firmament,
Firmament, right. So
yes, the
it goes
rakia,
hand in hand with flat earth, having a firmament.
exactly,
And the 4
exactly.
pillars and the 4 cardinal directions of the earth, that
Yep,
sounds like a square. It's a flat earth right
yeah,
there. So,
exactly.
you can see how they go hand in hand.
So it's well, yeah. So yes, like the four corners of the earth. Yeah, that's like the face of a compass, basically, right?
Right.
So
Which has to do with what we're talking about because so the last time you and I had this show, we were talking about the sons of light and the sons of darkness.
yeah.
But we're gonna go back a little bit in time to Alexander the Great. He sweeps through Asia
Hmm.
and conquers what they thought was the world at the time. Obviously, it wasn't the whole world, but the civilized world, the non-barbarian world,
The Mediterranean.
the Mediterranean
Yep.
and Mesopotamia, all the way to India.
Yeah.
And so he does that, and the book of Daniel says that this book is supposedly written before Alexander the Great. And Josephus even plays into this. Josephus says that Alexander was shown in display a scroll of the book of Daniel that tells him you're gonna die, by the way, and your kingdom's gonna be divided into 4. Which is
Yeah.
like right away you just gotta scratch your head and say, you mean you told Alexander the Great he's gonna die and he's okay with that? Bullshit.
Josephus even this is a recycled story because Josephus said the same thing about Cyrus as well.
Exactly.
So
Seems
that
like it's like a
that he
motif.
was, shown prophecies about himself from Isaiah. Similarly, Alexander was shown prophecies from the book of Daniel, supposedly, that referred to him, and he was so impressed he decided to leave Jerusalem alone.
So it
So
seems like this might be a political strategy in a way. Not, but I'm not, now not saying that this happened with, not saying this actually happened with Alexander, but there could have been something similar happening, basically saying, "You're the prophesied one." Maybe not telling him he's going to die. That probably got switched up later. But it's possible that there could have been some sort of political move, like
well, what Josephus is trying to do here is his whole work, as valuable a work of history, and maybe I'll unpack this a little bit. You know, Josephus is writing in I think it's like the 80s or the 90s
right,
CE AD. Um and it's a proper history. He tells us he's writing a history of the Jewish people, and he's working hard to tell this history using the same sort of conventions as those of Herodotus
right, right.
and other Greek historians prior to him. But what is at the heart of Josephus's work is an apologetic. So he is putting together. He's written the Wars of the Jews, which is all about the first Jewish revolt.
Yeah, Vespasian and Titus and all those.
Yeah, so he wrote that, and then he went back and he's like, okay, I'm going to write like the entire Jewish history. Um and for the purpose of demonstrating to his Greek speaking audience. He didn't write this for Jewish people.
That's true.
This was written for his Greek speaking audience.
But he was already in Rome at this time, I
He
believe.
was in Rome at this time, and he was at and he was a, a Roman. He was a Roman hero as much as anything. For essentially, you know, turning
Changing sides.
turning tail. Yeah, he was a great trader. He
Yeah,
switched sides. He became a Roman operative.
right,
Got rich as a result of that, and then, lived the rest of his days in Rome under the patronage of the Caesar.
right.
And this is what
He
he's doing.
and he got the name Flavius. He got
Yes,
adopted by the Flavian dynasty.
exactly.
This is
So
very fascinating stuff right here.
So the whole work is an apologetic, and he tells us this outright. He basically says, I wanted to, lay out for my Greek speaking audience here the traditions, the antiquities of the Jewish people to show that just like your ancestors, the Jews were also a great ancient race of people that have all these traditions which make them really legitimate, make them really, really fantastic. So, strewn throughout Josephus's history are these Jewish apologetics, and this is, so this is one of them when he's telling this story about how Alexander the Great decided to spare Jerusalem because he was shown prophecies of himself in the book of Daniel. The whole purpose for this is to show, look, our literature is so amazing. We have this prophet named Daniel who accurately predicted Alexander's conquest, and then the fallout after that, because the Jews are awesome.
Right.
This is all at the heart of it.
And you gotta
So
keep in mind, this is the same Josephus who tells you in book 1 that they found the Ark of the Covenant. Or not the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of Noah. They
right,
found the boat
that's
on
true.
top of Mount Ararat. He's telling his audience that if you go on top of Mount Ararat, you'll find a piece of the boat. So you
There's
gotta remember, this is the same guy who's saying stuff like this,
There is all sorts of stuff like this
which is
in
what
throughout
apologists
Josephus's writings.
what
Yeah, he
apologists do.
was
Is what they still do.
it's very true. So all that to say, yeah, Josephus really liked the book of Daniel.
Yeah.
So,
And
and apologists today really like the book of Daniel.
of course they do. Because it seems like if you can date the book to before the time of Alexander the Great, you have this perfect prophecy almost of explaining. And this there's a scroll, I believe it's titled The Four Kingdoms. Is that what it's titled?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the conventional title. That's the
Yeah.
title. That's
And basically it's
pull up here.
what Daniel's talking about is Alexander's kingdom being divided up into four. So you got the Ptolemies in Egypt, you got the Seleucids in Syria, and then up in Greece, you divide it up into what Cassander has Hellas, and Lysimachus has Thrace, which is the four kingdoms. So you have divided up into four, just like Daniel was talking about. The only problem is that that's if you're really gonna be thinking deeply about this, then you have to wonder, how is this? What about free will? And then if they knew about this, why would they go along with it? Because you're telling me Alexander knows this prophecy, so you're telling me he's just gonna go along with it, and he has a choice to not go along with it. So then you're like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. And then it's like,
Right.
and then it gets into the whole aspect of so Daniel nails a bunch of stuff right. Okay,
Yeah.
if he is dated to where he is, but he also gets a lot of stuff wrong too.
Well, this is the problem, right? I mean, traditionally speaking, it was accepted for a very, very long time that the book of Daniel was written by this person, this figure, this prophet Daniel, who lived in Babylon,
Under
was
under
exiled
Nebuchadnezzar.
from Jerusalem, yes, by Nebuchadnezzar, when Jerusalem was destroyed, and he lived in Babylon, and he had these adventures in Nebuchadnezzar's court, and then he had these visions, which he wrote down, which were prophetic predictions about the future, and he talks about the coming of the Greeks, and he talks about the Antiochian crisis in the mid second century, and he talks about all these things in such great detail that you know ancient people, many of them were as astonished by these as many modern evangelicals. Like, this is, oh my god, look at this, this is he's predicting things so precisely in the second century. It's an amazing instance of fulfilled prophecy. Scholars, and not just scholars, but I mean as early as the, I think, the second or third century CE, some keen-eyed observers have noticed that, well, wait a minute, there seems to be some inconsistency here right within the book of Daniel itself. What we see is when Daniel is speaking about things that take place during his own lifetime, during the rule of Nebuchadnezzar, um, he gets all sorts of historical details quite wrong.
Mhm.
He calls Belshazzar a king when Belshazzar was not a king, and he calls Belshazzar the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, and he was not. He was the son
Doesn't
of.
doesn't he call Darius a Mede when he's not really a Mede?
Yeah. So there's another one. There's a figure in there called Darius the Mede, who is absolutely completely unknown
By the way,
from history.
that's like saying I'm a Canadian, but I'm American. That's a
You're
totally different place.
you're Neil the Canadian,
Right. That's literally what that's saying because Media is in the north and he's not in the north. Media is close to Armenia. It's a totally different
right?
race of people. So it's
Right.
not the same thing. And a lot of people in the West will say it's the same thing. It's not the same thing. It's not even close.
Exactly. He's got all these historical details from his own time period wrong.
Right. From
You
his
know,
own
how
time period. So
from his own time period.
he's getting things right in the future more correctly than he's getting stuff in his own time period.
Very precisely right in the future, but then within his own time period, he's making all these mistakes. And then it seems too, he's accurately predicting things like just with pinpoint precision all the way up into about 165, 161 BCE. But then after that, again, things start to
Very
get
wrong.
very hazy, very ambiguous, and it's at that point there's all this talk of the kingdom of God in the near future. So scholars have used these clues to quite realistically and accurately demonstrate that no, the book of Daniel was not actually written by a person living in Babylon in the 6th century BC. It was actually written in the 2nd century during the Antiochian crisis, during the time when the Seleucids um, basically overthrew the Ptolemies in the area and took over the region and took over Jerusalem, and then desecrated the temple in Jerusalem, and also subjected the citizens of the city to a program of intense Hellenization. And they managed to do a lot of this too through corrupting the priesthood.
Right.
So this is the background for what happens throughout the book of Daniel. And this is something that scholars have recognized for, oh, uh, pretty universally for well over a century now. And there's other clues too within the book of Daniel. I mean, one of the key ones, and this is one which still presents a number of problems, is the fact that the book of Daniel is composed of two languages. The first half, generally speaking, is written in Aramaic, and the second half, starting in Daniel chapter 8, is written in Hebrew. Now, what's quite intriguing about this is the way that this is structured. There's actually the entirety of chapter 1, I should say, in the book of Daniel is written in Hebrew. And then and it's Hebrew all the way throughout this introductory chapter, which is sort of like an establishing chapter for a larger narrative. And then in chapter 2, when Nebuchadnezzar has his first dream and Daniel is summoned before him, it starts out and says that so the king answered Daniel, or somebody answered somebody else. It's either the king or Daniel. I don't remember offhand. And they said then in Aramaic, and then the text switches to Aramaic to complete the quote, the quotation from the figure in the narrative, but then it never actually switches back.
Hmm.
So then the entire rest of the text, all the way from, I think it's 2 verse 4 all the way through to the end of chapter 7, is Aramaic.
Interesting.
So yeah, so here's an instance where scholars are going, well, that's kind of weird, and it's strange the way that it's structured. This suggests also that there's a division in this book, not just in terms of content, because all of this Aramaic stuff is comprised of these tales about Daniel and his adventures in the court of Nebuchadnezzar, along with his three friends, um, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azrael, otherwise known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Hmm.
But then there's a switch in after Daniel 6, which is the story of Daniel in the lion's den.
Right.
Chapter 7 the first of these visions that Daniel has. And this one is written in Aramaic. But then one of the subsequent four visions that Daniel has from chapter 8 through 12 is written in Hebrew. So yes, there is this division within the book that suggests to scholars that the book of Daniel was not just, you know, composed by the proposed author in the time and location of Babylon in the 6th century.
Wow.
So yeah, but it's a fascinating book in large part because it is relative to many of the books in the Bible. It's quite late. So if Daniel was written in, or at least completed in the 160s, and of course, as this goes with many of these things among scholars, there's debate and discussion about whether or not the entire book of Daniel was composed in the 2nd century, or if this is something that developed over a longer period of time but completed in the 2nd century. These are some of the things that we
I was just
debate
gonna ask
and
you
discuss.
I was just gonna ask you, is it
Yeah.
possible there was an older version of Daniel that was edited or changed or forgotten about and now is
Oh, I think so, and I would say, and that's one of the prevailing theories, is that you've got an Aramaic core of
right,
these stories, some of which may go as far back as the early Hellenistic period, as far back as the 300s.
right.
Um, and these were collected over time, and we also have evidence that uh, there's more of these tales that didn't quite make it into the book of Daniel. One of the really interesting things about the Greek text, the Septuagint version
Yeah.
of the book of Daniel, is that there's other stories too. There's the story of Susanna,
Bell and the
which
Dragon.
and then there's Bel and the Dragon, and then there's the song of the three young men. At Qumran, there's actually, and we'll get into this a little bit. Now we know of all these other Aramaic traditions or stories that feature Daniel, which some of which look fairly similar to these other Aramaic tales of Daniel that are in the book. So there's some evidence that this was like its own sort of literary genre. Like one of the things that Jews were enjoyed doing, as early as the early Hellenistic period, was writing these stories about this figure living in the court of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. And then these stories, a number of them, were collected together over time, and came to form like a larger book. And were edited in such a way that they connected more cleanly to one another. That's one of the interesting things about the book of Daniel too, which suggests to scholars that this was constructed from all these smaller pieces, is that the individual stories, you can actually separate them out, and literally they each and every one stands on its own as an independent composition. Essentially, there's an absence of these sorts of turns of phrases that you would expect in a running historical narrative, which say, and then this happened, or after these things this occurred. You won't find that in the book of Daniel.
That's true.
So it's quite fascinating. It's fascinating because it's quite a late book, which was very, very popular and even authoritative, quite early on after it was written among some Jews.
Right.
Um, and it's also a really, really great example because we have so much material that we can see contributed to the formation of the book of Daniel. We have all this information which helps us to understand just the composition of literature, Jewish literature in antiquity, more generally. So it's all pretty exciting, and the Dead Sea Scrolls play a major role in this discussion because
Absolutely.
one of the things that, excuse me, that was discovered in the caves of Qumran were lots and lots of copies of the Book of Daniel, as well as copies of other texts that look very much like the Book of Daniel, or other texts which look like they fit within this genre
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
Daniel literature. So it's we can talk about some of these things today.
I got one right in front of me. Actually, two of them right in front of me.
Oh yeah.
And the first one I want to ask you about is this one that's titled "The Four Kingdoms."
Hmm.
And it says, I'll just read it real quick because it's so short and it's really interesting too. So people might
Pretty
get a kick out.
fragmentary. So
Yeah, very
we're
fragmentary.
missing a lot.
Yeah, and I'll even point out what it's missing. It says right here. This is obviously in English, so this is not what it says, but this is translated uh by Geza Vermes. So I'm going to read the
Gaze
translation.
of Vermesh.
Yeah, yes. It says, I
Sorry.
saw an angel standing on whom light shone on four trees, stood by him, and trees rose and moved away from him. And he said to me, do you see this shape? And I said, yes. And I consider it. And I saw the tree. And then there's a bunch of dots there because it's not a
Because
place.
that's a
Yeah.
place where the fragment is ended.
Right. And then it says, and I asked it, what is your name? And it said to me, Babel. I guess this means Babylon. And I said to
Exactly.
it, are you the one who rules over Persia? And I saw another tree, and I asked it, what is your name? And it said to me, and just a bunch of dots, because I guess that's where the fragment runs off.
Yep.
And I'm guessing it's something along the lines of Seleucus, because it says, are you the one who rules over the sea and the ports?
The common understanding of the kingdoms is that, yes, so we've got Babylon and Persia. So Babylon is presented here as the kingdom who the tree who reigns over Persia, and then there's like a missing tree. But then the second tree, it says it's the one that extends to the Great Sea. This one is thought to represent the Seleucid kingdom or Syria. You were right.
Yeah, because it
That's
makes
right.
sense that the reason why I thought that is because the Seleucids were known for being like the Phoenicians, the
Yes,
modern version of the
that's
Phoenicians.
right.
they had the ships, they had the navies, they had the ports, and like the Seleucids are known for being like pirates, basically the
Right.
little pirates. And I'm
So
not mistaken, when Caesar, I think it was Julius Caesar, maybe it was someone before Julius Caesar, one of the Romans, when they stopped funding the Seleucids, they turned into a bunch of privateer pirates, like they hated each other,
right.
and they
Yeah.
fell into like descended into that. But go ahead.
No. Go ahead. I was just
Well,
agreeing
that's
with you.
that's what I was
It's
just gonna
fun.
point out. It's just when I think of Seleucids, I think of pirates because of that reason alone.
Right. So it's possible too that this other kingdom, um some have suggested it could be Rome even, which
Which
would
makes sense, which would fit.
it would. And this would actually this is so there's a couple things that that this fragment um helps us to understand. One of the things uh is that these ideas connected with the book of Daniel and this type of literature was being written very, very late, like well even beyond the Antiochian crisis, possibly, as late as the as the time of Pompeii,
Right.
um, into the 60s. The other thing um, this shows us is that this fits in with a very well-worn trope that finds its it comes out of a Mesopotamian context. Within Mesopotamian text, there's this focus on the four great kingdoms, and those are generally either Assyria or Babylon, and then um, Media, Persia, and Greece.
You're
So
right.
these are the four great kingdoms, right? We see this in the book of Daniel. The visions, so the dream that Nebuchadnezzar has in chapter 2, and then the visions, the subsequent visions starting in Daniel chapter 7 and all the way through Daniel chapter 12, the four kingdoms are the same. They're always Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece. So it's a repeated trope, and we see it elsewhere in the book of Tobit, which is a delightful little tale that dates back to the early second, maybe even the late 3rd century BC. So this predates the book of Daniel. It doesn't know anything about the Antiochian crisis that's coming. It's still before that, which makes it
Interesting.
a pretty good text to
Date.
read if you're interested in some of the history
Right.
of this period. We don't really know a lot about, but again, this same four kingdom trope appears there, and it's exactly the same. It's Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece. Now, what we have here is the same four kingdom trope, but by the looks of it, it's been adapted uh to apply to different kingdoms.
Interesting.
Right? So this is a writer recognizing this is the recognition of a genre or a way of writing, of storytelling, of communicating, but now he's adapting it to a new yeah, a new situation, new circumstances. So this is a cool text.
It is, yeah. So now they're looking at the world, they're saying, "Well, it's still 4, just different areas." So now instead
Yeah,
of Media, Persia, Babylon, and now we have Seleucus, and we have the Ptolemy, we have in 2 different areas of Greece, the Thrace and then the Hellas.
yeah,
So now it's like, okay, it's still 4, but it's just a little bit different. So the
that's
writer is
right.
trying to fit the mold, which he does very well, but it tells you what time period we're in. Per
Yeah,
perfectly,
definitely.
perfectly
Very
tells you what time period we're in. 'Cause
totally does.
if it was in a different time period, you would have heard the original 4, like you mentioned.
Most likely, yes.
Wow, that
So
makes
it yeah, and yeah, so I think too this is helpful in showing us one of the things that biblical scholars notice. And this is mo- a huge part of what we do is just work through issues of intertextuality. And we're constantly comparing all sorts of different types of text to one another because there is so much of this cross pollination throughout the ancient literature. I mean, I'm working on this video series right now with Dr. Josh Bowen at Digital Hammurabi, all about the intertextuality in Genesis chapter 2 and 3, and how stories from the Epic of Gilgamesh or from the myth of Enki and Hershag,
Absolutely.
and maybe even the
The
Adapa myth, although I don't think that one's quite as strong. But there's all this literary borrowing
yeah.
and dependency replete throughout the ancient world. And so I mean, this is just illustrative of the same thing, that there's these big ideas out there that everybody is drawing from. And usually this kind of stuff gets read in a text and the author goes, I want to take bits from, this story or this myth or
You see,
this prophecy, and like redeploy it, because I think there's some meaningful stuff in here, but I can draw from it and apply it better to
well,
my own
see this
time period.
we
And
see this happening right now in the world we live in right now in the movie industry, where
oh yeah,
we see old movies being brought back to life in a new form with a different story to tell, but the same mythos.
that's very true. That's
And
very true.
it's just what we do. It's like that's how
Well,
we operate. It's how we tell
this
our story.
new I'm really excited about the new Matrix movie, right?
Right.
But
Absolutely.
based on what I've seen in the trailers so far, and I saw a new one a couple weeks ago, uh which just out right on the screen, it just said deja vu, and it was like a minute long thing with basically all this imagery from the original Matrix movies, and this new one has me going, is this a I mean, is this like a whole new story, or is this a reboot even? Is
Right.
this the original are the Wachowski brothers actually now telling the same story
That's
in a
inter
new story,
Yeah, but
right?
this is what happened when the Greeks and the Jews living in the end of the 1st century, early 2nd century, when they got their hands on these manuscripts of Revelation, they would have had the same response.
Totally.
Did you read this Revelation text? Oh yeah, it reminds me of Daniel. Yeah, blah blah blah. They would have got the same response. Like obviously they believed in it a lot more heavily than we believe in movies, but
Yep.
it still would have been this talk of the town. And I'm sure it was the same type of thing.
So maybe this is a good point to jump into how this is something that is occurring even just within the book of Daniel itself.
Yeah.
And we can talk. So one of the things that I really like to talk about when it comes to Daniel, when it comes to the Dead Sea Scrolls, is sources for the book of Daniel, and how we know about some of these. So um, let's let's start with Daniel chapter 4. So this is the story from the book of Daniel of the madness of Nebuchadnezzar.
Right.
So basically, uh, Nebuchadnezzar is out, and the really interesting thing about the story, I have to find it here in my English Bible, which I'm not very good at navigating. Uh, okay,
I'm pulling it up too just to have it.
okay. So Daniel chapter 4. It starts off here. Um, mm, okay,
Nebuchadnezzar.
it's a yeah. It starts off with a little um it's different from any of the other stories within the book of Daniel, because it's actually written in the first person and in the mouth or the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. It starts with just Nebuchadnezzar the king, to all people, nations, and languages that dwell on the earth. Peace be multiplied to you. I thought it good to declare the signs and wonders. Sorry, my eyes are getting bad. That the Most High God has worked for me, How great are his signs, how mighty his works of wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. So here is his story. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts of my bed and the vision of my head troubled me. Therefore, I issued a decree to bring all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. So he does this, and nobody can interpret the dream. But at last, Daniel came before me.
Just like Joseph.
Yeah, and Daniel correctly interpreted the dream for him.
Just like Joseph in the Old Testament, right? This is
Just
like a
like that.
recurring thing. I like this is one thing about the Bible that I do love is like
So
it's all interconnected, interlaced.
very much so.
Yeah.
So, but it goes on. Daniel interprets two dreams for him, but then later on, beginning in verse 28, um, it says that so one of Daniel's dreams was that the king would suffer a humiliation because of his excessive pride, right? So then, starting in verse 28, it says, all this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar at the end of 12 months. He was walking about the royal palace of Babylon. The king spoke, saying, "Is it not this great Babylon that I have built for the royal dwelling, for a royal dwelling by the mighty river, and for the honor of my majesty?" While the word was still in the king's mouth, a voice fell from heaven. King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from you, and they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make you eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you until you know the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. In that very hour, the word was fulfilled concerning Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from men and ate grass like oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven till his hair had grown like eagle's feathers and his nails like a bird's claw. And then it returns to the first person. And here at the end of this time, it says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation, etc., etc. And then his faculties returned to him, and he returned to power. So this is a very unusual sort of story. Um, and scholars have suggested, even before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the scholars have suggested that this story might have had something to do with the very, very mysterious final king of Babylon, King Nabanitis. Um, King Nabanitis was seemed to be kind of a strange, maybe awkward sort of man who was a reluctant ruler in Babylon. He suddenly left the city and went out to a place called Temna, which is in Arabia, and lived out his rule in Temna.
Interesting.
And it was suggested that he maybe as a result of an illness or some kind of physical ailment that he had to go out and live out there while he was the king of Babylon. So some scholars had suggested that this story in the book of Daniel seems to maybe have been influenced by this actual history, um, about this actual history of Nabanitas, the last king of Babylon. Well, one of the most interesting, one of the most amazing discoveries in the Dead Sea Scrolls is a document that scholars have designated the Prayer of Nabanitis, and this text uh, looks very much like it is actually, maybe even a source for the story in the book of Daniel about Nebuchadnezzar's madness. But this story, unlike the one of Nebuchadnezzar, features the king Nabanitas.
Hmm.
And I'll just and it's very much like the story in Daniel chapter 4. It's written in the first person. It's set in the mouth or the hand of King Nabanitas, And I'll just read to you what we have from.
And I find it interesting that it's talking about a great tree, just like it is in the scrolls. The
That's right.
tree mythology or whatever you want to call it.
Exactly.
Vision of
Yeah.
trees. But go ahead.
So here's what the text says, and this is Peter Flint's translation. He actually did the work on this manuscript. So this is what this fragment says: the words of the prayer which Nabanitis, the king of Babylon, the great king, prayed when he was smitten with a bad disease by the decree of God in Temna. I, Nabanitis, with a bad disease, was smitten for 7 years since God set his face on me. He healed me. And as for my sin, he remitted. A diviner, he says, he was a Jew from among the exiles,
Hmm.
came to me and said, proclaim and write to give honor and exhortation to the name of God Most High. And I wrote as follows: I was smitten with a bad disease in Timnah by the decree of the Most High God for 7 years.
Wow.
I was praying to the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, clay, since I thought they were gods. And then the text breaks off. But there's a couple of things to note of interest here. It's written in the first person. It's featuring the Babylonian king. He is afflicted for 7 years. He
Right.
prays to God. There's something else that's very interesting in there. He has received help from
A Jew.
a Jew.
Interesting.
Now,
Well,
what I find really, really interesting about the Prayer of Nabanitis is that the Jew is anonymous,
wow.
right? So what scholars tend to imagine happened here is that the Prayer of Nabanitis is something that somebody read and decided to work it into um this Danielic kind of corpus, but then, you know, turning the anonymous Jew into the fictitious Daniel and the lesser known King Nabanitis into the much more uh, widely recognized king Nebuchadnezzar.
Because Daniel
So
just means judge of God, right? That could be a
yeah,
title.
and no, it's not a title, and I mean, I tend to think too the etymology of the name doesn't really have anything to do
Sure.
significantly with the fictitious figure that's featured in the book of Daniel. I think it's more likely there was a famous not Jewish wise man known throughout um the Mediterranean world by the name of Daniel, is actually mentioned in the book of Job, also mentioned in the book of Ezekiel. His name appears in a variety of other Mesopotamian texts. So I think that's more likely the inspiration for the actual name
Yeah, it
of
makes
the
sense.
yeah of the figure who's featured in the book of Daniel. So that's the Prayer of Nabanites. Now I have one other thing that I want to share with you. So there are two copies, very, very small bits of fragments of the book of Daniel from Qumran Cave 1. Um, and then there's another one, two, three, four, five. There's another five manuscripts of Daniel from Cave 4. And then one more from Cave 6 that, unlike the others, was actually written on papyrus and not parchment. So, first of all, I'm going to show you the most extensive of these is 4Q Daniel A. That is the first of the manuscripts of Daniel from K4. And I'm just going to pull up a couple of pictures that I have here. So here's and this is what I've done. I've taken all the pictures we have of the individual fragments from this manuscript of Daniel, and I have set them in what I imagine to be their place within the original scroll. So this is my attempted reconstruction, and I don't know how well you can
Wow.
read
I can
the.
see that. It looks so cool right
So
now.
basically, what
That's
I've done, I've put what I think are hypothetical column numbers up here. So column 2, column 3, column 4, column 5, column 6, and then you've got a fragment here which contains a bit from column 2 and some from column 3. You've got this great big fragment, which contains almost all of column 4 and some bits from column 5 and some other fragments that contain column 5 and then column 6. The other really neat thing about this very large fragment is on the right-hand side here, you have stitching holes.
Yeah.
And this indicates to us that this is the first of a new sheet, because the way they made scrolls in antiquity, they would stretch out the animal skins, they'd scrape them, they make the nice parchment, and then they would divide them into
That's
they'd
great.
rule them into columns and lines, right? And then they write on them, and then they'd attach them, they'd stitch them all together to make like a long scroll. So this copy is and now here these are the other fragments. We've got, I think, probably column 9. Uh oh wait, sorry. I've got column 11, 12, 13, and 14. So we're missing a whole bunch in between. Um but I show this to kind of illustrate how we go about um
Putting it together.
reconstructing texts,
That's so meticulous,
how
dude.
we imagine they looked like. Quite often, what I will do is I will actually type in, using the same handwriting. I'll type in what I think to be, in the blank areas to try
Yeah.
and get a sense of whether or not my reconstruction is any good. So so that's 4Q Daniel A. And as far as we know, this is a scroll that contained the entire book of Daniel. So all the way from chapter 1
Wow.
through to the end. Um, so I've got some figures here. There's 11 extant columns. It contains text from chapter 1 verse 15 through to 11 verse 16. The estimated size is about 28 columns in total. It would have measured probably about 3.5 meters or a little over 10 feet.
Wow.
Okay. Is written in a Herodian script, dates to about 50 to 1 um, BCE. So that's the second half of the first century BCE. Um, so that's that manuscript. Now, when we talk about manuscripts of Daniel at Qumran, the within our imaginations, we think these are all individual complete copies of the entire book of Daniel, right? And this tends to be how it's presented to us too, by in particular by apologists. We've got all these copies of the book of Daniel. I'm going to suggest to you that's not quite right. So we have this one that definitely contain the entire book of Daniel. But then we've got a bunch of others. This that you see on your screen now is a fragment from 4Q Daniel B. It contains text from about 9 extant columns and text from chapter 5, verse 10 to 8, verse 16. Um, and this manuscript actually looks like it appears to have been copied directly from the former one. So
Wow.
and one of the ways we know that is because on a second where they overlap, they align perfectly to one another. That as in all the lines begin and end in the same place all the way
Interesting.
down. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And this is, as far as we know, this is the only example of like two manuscripts where we have a clear idea that one was copied directly from the other
Right.
in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Um, so there's that one. The next one is so yes, this one would have it measured about 32 columns if the second half was included. Now, remember I said the only extant text survives from chapters 5 through 8. So what's missing is or I should yeah, okay. So um it includes just the first of the Hebrew oracles in the second part of the book of Daniel. It was probably the entire book of Daniel, but we don't really know for sure. If it was though, um it would have measured about almost 4 meters long, or what is that? About 12 feet.
Wow.
and it dates to from about 20 to 50 CE. So this is like closer to the middle of the first century CE, right around the time of Jesus' adulthood or shortly after that. Okay.
Wow. That's even
So
that's just the context behind it. It makes it so crazy.
I know, right?
'Cause this is
So
this
this next one,
actual these are the actual Qumran Jews, right?
who are
The
copying these
Essenes?
texts. Yes.
Are they Essenes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
But they're, I think there's some qualification here. They are Essenes, but we also need to understand that there were even different individual groups of Essenes.
Sure, sure,
I
sure.
don't think that you can all just. I don't think it was quite as as centralized and organized as we imagine. Okay, so this one is very very cool. This is all we have from 4Q Daniel C, and it's the oldest of the Daniel manuscripts. It's Hasmonean. It dates to between about 150 BCE, so that's the first half of the first century BCE. I think 100 is too early. It's a fairly fluid, semi-cursive, unruled, unblocked hand. I'm gonna zoom in here
Yeah,
onto
definitely,
this.
definitely.
So, and one of the things you'll notice, the handwriting on this one looks a little sloppier
Yeah.
than the other two. It's
Looks
definitely
looks like Hebrew, but is that Aramaic?
no. This is Hebrew,
Yeah, okay, I'm
but they'll look the same, right? You
They
won't
do
be
look
able to
similar. They do look similar, yeah.
you won't be able to visibly see a difference between Hebrew and Aramaic. They use the same letters. Uh, this bottom margin here, this margin in between these two columns here, they're quite small.
Yeah.
Um, when we see small margins, and here too, like this text looks like it's written right up to almost the edge of this
Yeah, yeah,
sheet
yeah, for
here.
sure.
So what this suggests to us, when you look and you take all the data about lines and line spacing and margin size and letter size, and you plug it all into into a spreadsheet, and you do the calculations on it. One of the things that you discover is that scrolls have small margins and large scrolls have large margins.
Yeah,
By the
interesting.
same token, large scrolls are much taller in size. Small scrolls are shorter, like in height. That's what I meant. So large scrolls are also taller, like vertically speaking, they have more lines per column. Small scrolls, like short ones of just tiny little books, they'll be much shorter. So this manuscript is really interesting because it's the oldest copy of Daniel that we have. All that's left within it, all that these fragments contain are material from chapter 10 verse 5 to 11 verse 29. Um I would say it's about a total of 4 columns, and my personal feeling is that this manuscript only contained the prophecies from chapter 10 through chapter 12 and nothing else. And one of the reasons we know this is that uh so if it contained just that amount of material, it would have been a total of 8 columns, including the end of the book. Would have measured approximately 95 centimeters long. Uh, it's about, when you reconstruct it, and we can reconstruct it because we have a running text, so we know the dimensions. We know how much text to plug in the blank areas, right, between these two columns. It would have measured only about 10 centimeters high. So very short. Only, I think, 11 or 12 lines are in
You
there.
said this is chapter 12 of Daniel?
Chapters 10 through 12,
Oh.
right?
So this is the
So
Hellenistic Wars.
yes, these are these last prophecies. But here's what's significant. Now, if one wanted to posit that this was an entire scroll containing the entire book of Daniel, then it would have measured over 107 columns and
Wow.
would have been over 14 meters in length.
Massive.
So that's over 30 feet. And this strikes me as virtually impossible based on the dimensions,
Yeah.
because you're not writing on a 10 centimeter strip of
Right.
leather and then just stretching that out forever and ever and ever and ever. If you're
Yeah.
writing within a whole book, you're going to use a bigger scroll,
Right.
right?
Wouldn't make sense to have those chapters stretch out for that distance if it was the whole thing.
Exactly.
I get what
Exactly.
you're saying. Yeah.
So, and that's based on my calculation. There's 31,638 letters in the book of Daniel in the Masoretic Text. So, yeah, so that's 4Q Daniel C, which I think is a really neat one. So I won't talk too much about this. This is the fourth copy of Daniel, and it too doesn't contain the whole book. It only contains bits from chapters 3 through chapter 7.
Interesting.
And I think realistically, again, could possibly have been only, maybe the first half of the book of Daniel.
Right.
Now here, this is the one I also really wanted to get to. So this is all we have left of 4Q Daniel D. Sorry, 4Q Daniel E. Is just these one, two, three, four,
That's
five
it.
little scraps. It's just these little scraps. So, and
Oh, I see a shin. I see an aleph.
yeah,
I see a
that's a hay actually.
that's a hay. Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So the script on this one is quite old as well.
Yeah.
And it's what we would call a semi-cursive. So this is this is not a formal script or a block script like we saw in those first two manuscripts, which is what you usually write with when you're writing
Does that
a
say
big document.
Hashem?
Yes, it does.
Oh, I just read
So
it. Look how good I am.
bravo, good for you, man. So these fragments contain only uh, a few words from Daniel chapter 9, verse 12 to 17. Now, the reason I brought this particular manuscript up is because this one is, again, almost certainly just a short little bit from the book of Daniel. I think most likely it only contained the Daniel's prayer in chapter 9.
Hmm.
If you want to turn there, we can
Yeah.
look at this. So, like, chapter 9 opens up with during the reign of uh, Darius the Mede, of course, this fictional character who almost certainly was confused by the author of the book of Daniel for
Yeah.
Darius the Persian.
Even
Um,
in my English copy, it says of the race of the Medes.
yes, of course,
It's like,
exactly.
eh.
So, Daniel speaking in the first person here, and he says, "I understood by the books the number of years specified by the word of Yahweh through Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem." So this is the introduction to
That's
this.
the 70-year thing, the
Yes, so
prophecy,
he's read the 7-year prophecy, and then it says, "I turn my face towards the Lord God,
right?
who made to make request by prayer and supplication with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. And I prayed to Yahweh my God and made confession and said to him," and then it rehearses the entire prayer that Daniel spoke to Yahweh. And then at the conclusion of the prayer, it says, "Now while I was speaking, praying," and this picks up in verse 20. "Now while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel and presenting my supplication before Yahweh. Then Gabriel, the angel, appears to Daniel, and he goes on to explain to him the meaning of Jeremiah's prophecy and how 70 years is actually 70 weeks of years.
Right.
So, but what I want to focus on is this prayer, because what's contained in these fragments is only the text of the prayer that Daniel utters. Okay.
So you're talking about 70 weeks out of Creed?
No, we're not even we're not talking at all about the 70 weeks themselves. We're only talking about the prayer that Daniel prays, starting in where is it? Uh Here it is. It starts in verse 4. He says, "O Lord, great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant and mercy with those who love him and with those who keep his commandments, we have sinned and committed iniquity. We have done wickedly and rebelled, even by departing from your precepts and your judgments. Neither have we heeded your servants, the prophets who spoke in your name, in our kings, um, and our princes, to our fathers and all the people of the land. O Yahweh, righteousness belongs to you, but to us shame of face, as it is to this day, to the men of Judah, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and all Israel, those near and those far off, and all the countries to which you have driven them, because of the unfaithfulness which they have committed against you." So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it goes on like this. It's a prayer to God of confession for sins and a petition for mercy. Now, we're going to skip I guess we're going backwards because we're in an English Bible here. So we're going to skip backwards to the book of Ezra.
Okay.
Chapter 9. In the book of Ezra, there's also the preserved text of one of these prayers. So, and I'm going to start reading here in Ezra 9, chapter 5. This is Ezra speaking. "At the evening sacrifice, I arose from my fasting, and having torn my garment and my robe, I fell to my knees and spread out my hands before Yahweh my God, and I said, O my God, I too am ashamed and humiliated to lift up my face to you, my God. For our iniquities have risen higher than our heads, and our guilt has grown up to the heavens. Since the days of our fathers, to this day we have been very guilty. For our iniquities,
Wow.
we, our kings, and our priests have been delivered into the hands of kings of the lands, to the sword, to captivity, to plunder, to humiliation, as it is to this day." So, and it goes on and on, but they're not exactly the same. But I think you
Definitely.
can see, and I hope everyone can see, that they're similar types of literature.
Yeah.
These are prayers that employ
Almost like a lamentation in a way.
Yes, yes. So, but they employ similar language. They follow similar themes.
Right.
Now, these fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls preserve only content from this prayer of the book of Daniel. Now, the prayer on its own, you will notice, he never self-identifies. He never says, "I, Daniel, please have mercy on me, Daniel. This is me, Daniel, speaking." This is just on its own an anonymous prayer, a petition, a confession of sin, and a petition for forgiveness and mercy. And what we have here are fragments of this prayer that appears in the book of Daniel. I'm going to suggest to you that these fragments come from a manuscript that preserved just this prayer. And if they did, then this is quite possibly not even within this manuscript a prayer of Daniel. This very well may just be a general petition, a general confession of sin and petition for mercy that ended up getting plugged into the book of Daniel and then, assigned to Daniel himself. Do you understand what I'm getting at here?
That makes perfect sense, actually.
So this is what I would consider source material
Right.
for the book of Daniel. We have this at Qumran. We have a copy of this prayer
Wow.
that looks like it was independent of the book of Daniel itself. So, all that to say, and now I am afraid that that I have used up all this time
Oh,
to
no, this
talk
has
about
been
this
great.
stuff.
It's been
So,
great.
but I'm afraid that that I'm going to have to cut this short.
No, dude, we went past. We went over.
Ah, we did.
So don't worry about it, man. This has
But
been great, and we're definitely gonna have another conversation about the Dead Sea Scrolls very soon.
absolutely.
And I
So-
always enjoy this. So everyone that's watching, you have just attained true gnosis.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.